They say you can measure a town by how it treats strangers. But what about the way it treats its old heroes? The morning in Billings, Montana started like any other. The sharp spring sun cut across the city's low buildings and cast long shadows over the cracked concrete lot of the Greyhound station. A battered American flag flapped above the door, faded but stubborn, refusing to let go of color or meaning. Inside, Master Sergeant Hank Riley shuffled to the ticket counter, the worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder, hanging like an old regret. His steps were slow, careful, betraying a limp that no longer surprised him. At 72, Hank carried the kind of exhaustion that lives deep in the bones, the kind you don't shake off with a good night's sleep. He stood at the counter, the air smelling of overbrewed coffee and stale donuts. The clerk, a young man named Trent with a patchy mustache and an earring, tapped at his phone without looking up. Hank waited, shifting from one aching foot to the other, staring at the rows of buses out the window. Finally, Trent glanced up, eyes already impatient. "Yeah?" Hank reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a military travel voucher, edges softened from years in a wallet. He slid it across the scratched plastic counter with trembling fingers. "One to Great Falls, son. Just one way." Trent picked up the paper, reading it with a smirk. "What is this, like a coupon?" "It's a government voucher," Hank replied quietly. "Issued to me, after my last deployment. They told me I could use it for transportation, any time." "Sir, this is expired," Trent said, voice flat, flicking the paper back like it was nothing. "You can't use this. It's not even in the system anymore. Sorry." There was a sharp hush. A dozen people in the waiting area looked over their newspapers, their phones, their bagels. Someone coughed, uncomfortable. Hank looked at the voucher again, willing the faded ink to mean something more. His throat tightened. It's all I have," he managed. Trent shook his head. "That thing's worthless. Sorry, rules are rules. You'll need to pay cash or card like everyone else." From the benches, a teen with pink hair and headphones smirked, holding up his phone, clearly filming. A middle-aged man in a suit glanced away, frowning at his shoes. The silence in the room grew heavier, thickening with every second Hank just stood there, hunched and defeated. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His hand hovered over his old army cap, uncertain, then dropped to his side. He could feel everyone's eyes on him, some curious, some embarrassed, some just blank. Hank swallowed, his lips trembling. "Thank you anyway," he whispered. He turned, his steps unsteady, shame prickling at his skin. As he walked away from the counter, his duffel bag thumped against his hip, a reminder of the weight he'd carried. Not just today, but for decades. The kid with the phone snickered, whispering to his friend, "Get a load of that. Grandpa can't even buy a ticket." No one spoke up. No one moved. In that moment, the great American value of respect for veterans was just a slogan on a bumper sticker, not a truth alive in the room. Hank kept walking, staring at the faded linoleum floor, counting the yellowing tiles. The Greyhound station suddenly felt enormous, the silence echoing in his head. He passed a family with 2 little girls, who stared at his medals pinned to his jacket. Their mother tugged them closer, avoiding his eyes. He reached the doors. Outside, the wind was sharp, cold. It bit at his cheeks and forced his eyes to water, though he would have said it was just the wind. He paused on the steps, heart pounding, throat raw. He had nowhere to go, not really. Just the hope of catching a bus to Great Falls, to maybe find work, or at least a friend who still remembered his name. He fumbled with his wallet, finding a few crumpled dollars. nowhere near enough for a ticket. Behind him, the door opened and closed, the world continuing as if nothing had happened. The voices inside resumed. Sports scores, family plans, a woman laughing at something on her phone. Hank felt as though he'd been erased, folded into the invisible ink of history. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, back to a different station in a different year, Vietnam, 1971, where men in uniform were jeered and spat at, where the country he'd fought for didn't seem to know him anymore. But that was decades ago. Surely things had changed, hadn't they? But here he was, alone on the steps of a bus station, 72 and invisible, clutching a worthless piece of paper and a handful of nothing. He closed his eyes. The ache in his knee pulsed, but it was the ache in his chest that truly hurt. Maybe he should just walk. Maybe it was time to let go. As Hank took a deep, shaky breath, the wind whipped his jacket tighter around him. Behind the glass door, the clerk went back to his phone. The boy with the camera grinned, and the world kept spinning. But out on those steps, the world was very still, a silent audience to a man's quiet humiliation. He didn't know it, but the moment was being captured, on a shaky cell phone video and in the hearts of a few silent witnesses. Later, they would remember the old man with the limp, the faded medals, the heavy bag, and the voucher no one wanted. For now, Hank Riley stood alone at the edge of the world, not knowing that his story was only just beginning. For a moment, the world on the station's cold concrete steps seemed to slow. The old soldier stood, framed in the glass doorway, shoulders slumped, hand clutched around that expired voucher. All around him, the city hurried on. Cars rolled through puddles, pigeons picked at crumbs, a stray busker's harmonica drifted in from the corner. Yet, in this narrow slice of Montana morning, the very air seemed to hold its breath. Inside, as the laughter and murmurs resumed, a different kind of movement occurred. A ripple, faint but undeniable, across the small sea of faces in the waiting area. Some passengers went back to their coffee, their crossword puzzles, their phones, but not everyone. In the third row, a woman with gray-streaked hair paused, eyes lingering on the old man through the dirty glass. She hesitated, set down her thermos, and pushed herself to her feet. Lou Bennett had never considered herself a hero, not in the storybook sense. She was 67, retired from the city's sanitation department after 40 years of hard, honest work. Her hands bore the proof, calluses and scars. The kind you get from fixing things, from hauling, lifting, patching, and mending. She wore practical shoes, a navy windbreaker, and a stubborn streak that, as her late husband Carl used to say, could outstubborn a mule on a mountain pass. Lou moved quickly. No nonsense, purposeful, her expression unreadable except for the glint in her eye. She bypassed the gawkers and sidestepped a cluster of giggling teenagers who barely noticed her. At the ticket counter, Trent was scrolling on his phone again, bored already, the moment with the old veteran as disposable as yesterday's news. Lou's voice was low but steady. "Excuse me, son." Trent looked up, blinked at her. Yeah?" She didn't wait for further invitation. "How much for the next ticket to Great Falls?" He glanced at the screen, thumb hovering. $89, ma'am, one way." "Put it on my card," she said, slipping her wallet from her bag with hands that didn't tremble. She tapped her chipped debit card on the reader, never looking back to see if anyone was watching. Trent, slightly confused, hesitated. "Are you buying for—" Lou didn't answer. She just pressed the card again, firmer this time, until the machine beeped. "Print the ticket. Name's Riley. Hank Riley." Her tone brooked no debate. Ticket in hand, she turned, scanning the windows until she spotted the old man still standing outside, shoulders bowed, gaze fixed on the horizon. Without a word, Lou pushed through the door. The cold bit her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. She marched right up to Hank, who looked up in surprise. "Here you go," she said, pressing the bus ticket into his palm. "And take this too. You look like you haven't eaten since dawn." From her canvas tote, she pulled out a brown paper bag, her own lunch, lovingly packed for the ride north. A ham sandwich, an apple, a small thermos of sweet tea. Hank tried to speak but found he couldn't. His lips parted, but only a faint, hoarse sound came out. Lou smiled, but there was nothing sentimental about it. She simply nodded. "Don't make a big deal. One day, years ago, someone helped my husband get home after the war. Didn't ask for anything, just did it because it was right." She handed him the sandwich. "Today I help you. World still turns." Hank blinked, overwhelmed. He felt a hot rush at the corners of his eyes and looked down, embarrassed. Thank you, ma'am, Lou waved him off. "Eat. Get on that bus. No one should have to stand out here feeling small. Not after everything." Inside, the kid with the phone kept recording, now aiming at the strange sight of a woman in a blue windbreaker handing food to an old soldier. A few people craned their necks, some curious, some ashamed. A middle-aged woman near the vending machine pressed a hand to her mouth, watching. Hank hesitated, then managed a shaky nod. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to. My Carl, he always said, the smallest kindness can carry someone a long, long way." Lou's voice softened for a moment, her eyes glistening, but she quickly regained her composure. "Go on. Bus'll be boarding soon." As she turned to go, the station seemed to exhale. A few passengers watched, some nodding, some lost in thought. Trent, behind the counter, looked sheepish, eyes glued to the keyboard. The teen with the phone stopped recording, uncertain now, and slowly lowered his hand. Hank stood for a moment, sandwich and ticket clutched in his trembling hands, as if afraid they might vanish. The weight that had pressed him down lifted just a little, replaced by something warmer, unexpected. He shuffled to a bench, sitting down with care, his heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. Lou, meanwhile, made her way back inside. She didn't look for applause or gratitude. She didn't even glance at the people now staring at her. She simply picked up her thermos, gathered her things, and found a quiet spot by the window. She settled into her seat, gazing out at the busy street. In her mind, she saw Carl's smile, heard his old gravelly laugh. She touched the locket at her throat, a faded photo of a young man in uniform inside, and let the memory carry her for a while. A few minutes later, as the bus for Great Falls pulled in with a long hiss of brakes, the passengers began to gather. Hank, still dazed, stood and shuffled to the line, careful not to meet anyone's eyes. When he handed his ticket to the driver, the man tipped his cap, recognizing the medals on Hank's jacket. "Thank you for your service, sir." Hank nodded, tears threatening, and found a window seat near the back. He unwrapped the sandwich, soft bread, a thick slice of ham, just the right amount of mustard. He took a bite, and for the first time in a long time, felt something like hope. From her seat inside, Lou watched the bus pull away, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, did not wave. She just took a long sip from her thermos, the warmth steadying her hands. Her act of kindness was already receding in the rearview mirror of the world, a moment barely noticed, lost in the rush of daily life. But something in the air had shifted. A small seed had been planted. And though Lou did not know it yet, the video taken by the teen now posted online, already gathering views, would soon ripple far beyond the dusty waiting room of the Billings bus station. Outside, the Montana sky stretched wide and blue, clouds like distant ships on a silent sea. And for just a moment, an old soldier and a retired sanitation worker, strangers brought together by need and kindness, each felt the world tilt, however slightly, toward the good. Lou Bennett's life, by most measures, was unremarkable. She returned home that afternoon with the same steady steps she'd always used, her canvas tote a little lighter, her wallet thinner by $89 and some change. No one greeted her at the door of her modest white clapboard house on Elm Street, but she didn't expect it. Her neighbors, friendly enough, tended to their own routines. The mailman waved from the end of the block, and Lou waved back, the edges of her lips barely moving. Inside, her home was warm, scented faintly of lavender and old paper. Photos lined the mantel above a weathered fireplace. Her late husband Carl in various uniforms and settings, a young man at boot camp, older and squinting beside a battered truck, arms around Lou in front of a 4th of July parade float. Mixed in were smaller frames, her own parents, a dog named Tinker she'd loved as a girl, a faded picture of herself and Carl on their wedding day, his hand resting on hers as if promising to never let go. She didn't tell anyone about what happened at the bus station. There was no one to tell, really. Her sister lived states away, her grown son busy in Missoula, her neighbors kind but not close. Even if she'd wanted to share the story, it felt unnecessary, like describing the weather or the color of the curtains. She simply knew, deep in her chest, that it had been the right thing to do. Lou hung her coat, toed off her shoes, and fed her 3 stray cats, Mama Gray, Smokey, and Butterball, who greeted her with gentle mews and winding tails. She bent to refill their bowls, humming an old tune that Carl had once played on the radio during Sunday mornings. The cats purred, content, as if sensing something good had happened that day. After tending to her pets, Lou poured herself a mug of weak coffee and stepped out to her backyard, where the picket fence leaned like tired old men at a bar. The afternoon sun warmed her face, and she spent a quiet hour fixing a loose slat on the fence, the familiar ache in her knees reminding her of time's slow march. She talked softly as she worked, not to anyone in particular, but to the memory of Carl, as she always did when her hands were busy and her heart was full. "Had a moment at the station today, Carl," she murmured, twisting a rusty screw. "You'd have liked this fella. Looked worn, like someone who's seen too many winters, but still standing. I think you would have done the same if you'd been there." The words floated into the stillness, heard only by the birds and the breeze. Later, Lou dusted the living room, watered her spider plant, and set a small plastic-wrapped meal aside for Mrs. McCrary, the widowed neighbor who sometimes forgot to eat. She clipped coupons from the newspaper, setting aside a stack for herself and another for the local food pantry. There was nothing remarkable about her day. In fact, it unfolded as most of her days did, quiet, unhurried, purposeful. Evening brought her to St. Mary's, the little church 3 blocks away, where she slipped into a back pew for the Wednesday supper. The pastor's wife ladled soup, and Lou shared soft conversation with the ladies who knitted blankets for new mothers. She kept her story to herself, joining in prayers and laughter, her eyes twinkling as the choir rehearsed, "God Bless America." No one guessed that she had given up her lunch and her money for a stranger. To the others, she was just Lou, dependable, plain, always ready with a casserole or a ride. When Lou got home that night, she walked her small yard one more time, picking up a stray soda can someone had tossed over the fence. She stood for a moment under the porch light, listening to the distant hum of cars and the chirp of crickets. There was a gentle peace in the air, as if the world itself was taking a long, deep breath. She thought about the old soldier, Hank Riley, the name already etched in her memory. She wondered if he'd made it to Great Falls, if he'd found a warm place to sleep, if he'd eat the sandwich or save it for later. Lou hoped, fiercely, that he'd know kindness again, that this small moment might carry him a little further down the road. Inside, she opened a box of her husband's medals, running her fingers over the ribbons, the service pins, the little notes he'd tucked between them. "You always said people forget, but sometimes they remember, Carl," she whispered, placing a small American flag next to his picture. "I helped one more, just like you would have wanted." She made herself a simple dinner: eggs on toast, sliced tomato, a piece of apple pie from the church supper. She ate at her kitchen table, listening to the soft tick of the clock and the low rumble of the evening news on the radio. There was comfort in the routine, in the gentle return to normal, in knowing that she'd done what she could. Later, Lou sat on her front porch, wrapped in Carl's old flannel jacket, watching the last light slip behind the cottonwoods. She sipped her tea, warm and sweet, her mind quiet. There was no expectation of thanks, no anticipation of change, just the quiet satisfaction that comes from an act done for its own sake, unnoticed by the world, but important all the same. Night settled over Billings, cool and gentle, as Lou drifted inside and prepared for bed. She brushed her teeth, pulled the quilt up to her chin, and listened to the wind rustling the trees outside her window. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered another good night to Carl, feeling his presence as surely as she felt the softness of her pillow. As the city slept, Lou's small kindness traveled silently through the world, unseen, unnamed, but already weaving itself into stories that would, in time, change everything. The next morning, golden light spilled gently across Lou Bennett's kitchen, painting long stripes over her checkered linoleum floor. The house was quiet but not empty, filled with the faint scent of percolating coffee, the soft pads of cat paws, and the comfortable clutter of memories. It was a house that had weathered time, just like Lou herself. She woke up earlier than usual, sunlight slipping across her eyelids, a subtle sense of peace blooming in her chest. It was a rare feeling, a quiet contentment she hadn't known in a long time. Her body still ached with the familiar chorus of age, but her spirit felt lighter, almost as if some small part of her had been unburdened overnight. Lou brewed her morning coffee, humming under her breath, the old radio playing a tune from the 70s. Outside, the world was waking up. A delivery truck rattled down Elm Street. The neighbors' sprinklers hissed, and a mockingbird sang from the fence post. She fed the cats, opening a fresh can and divvying it into 3 bowls: Mama Gray, Smokey, and Butterball, then rinsed her hands and sat at the kitchen table with her mug. Her mind kept circling back to the Greyhound station and the old soldier, Hank Riley. She wondered if he'd made it to Great Falls, if he'd eaten the sandwich, if he'd found what he was looking for. She smiled to herself, thinking of the surprise on his face, the way his hand shook when he took the ticket. She hoped, quietly, that wherever he was, he'd carry a bit more hope because of her. It wasn't just about helping Hank. The truth was, Lou needed that moment too. She needed to remember that even in a world moving too fast, even when so much felt out of her control, she could still reach out and change someone's day for the better. She thought about all the small kindnesses she and Carl had shared over the years. Meals delivered, fences fixed, rides given, prayers offered for neighbors and strangers alike. It was how they'd measured their lives, not in riches or awards, but in good done quietly, with no expectation of reward. After breakfast, Lou put on her old windbreaker and crossed the street, carrying a little American flag in her hand. She walked the familiar path to the town cemetery, crunching over gravel, passing the rows of headstones weathered by sun and rain. She stopped at Carl's grave, a simple stone with his name and service dates, and knelt down, brushing away a stray leaf. She placed the flag in the grass, her hands lingering on the cool marble. "Morning, Carl," she whispered, her voice steady. "Did something yesterday that would have made you proud. Helped a man, another old soldier. Bought him a ticket, gave him my lunch. Felt like the right thing to do. Thought you should know." She closed her eyes, feeling the presence of her husband, as real as the morning sun. She remembered his stories, how he'd hitchhiked home from Vietnam, how a stranger had given him a ride and a meal when he had nothing but the uniform on his back. "Kindness goes farther than you think," he'd always told her. "You never know where it might end up." Lou sat there for a while, hands folded, letting her mind wander through memories sweet and bitter. She remembered the nights Carl woke gasping from dreams, the quiet strength he carried, the way he'd always stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. "I helped one more, Carl," she said softly, "just like you would have wanted." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers. A mourning dove cooed nearby, and Lou took that as a sign to rise. She dusted off her knees, pressed her palm to the stone one last time, and stood. Her heart felt steady, her steps sure as she walked home. Back at the house, Lou fixed the loose latch on her front gate, then settled onto her porch swing with a fresh cup of tea. She watched the street come to life. Children biking past, a neighbor mowing his lawn, a pair of women chatting over their morning walk. It was ordinary, but Lou saw it with new eyes. Every small gesture, every quiet smile a thread in the fabric of the community. She thought of the world as a big, complicated place, full of hurt and hurry and noise, but also, sometimes, if you paid attention, full of grace. Her kindness at the station felt like tossing a pebble in a pond, the ripples invisible at first, but destined to touch distant shores. She didn't know what would come of it, didn't need to. The feeling in her chest was enough. As the day wore on, Lou returned to her usual routines. She clipped coupons for the food pantry, wrote a birthday card to her niece, baked a loaf of banana bread for Mrs. McCrary next door. In the evening, she watered the potted plants on her porch and swept away the last of the spring pollen. When dusk settled, Lou sat on her porch, wrapped in Carl's old flannel, sipping her tea and watching the sky fade from blue to rose. The quiet was deep and reassuring, broken only by the sound of crickets and the distant hum of a train. She felt the day's peace settle into her bones, a soft reward, known only to her. She thought again of Hank Riley, out there somewhere, maybe sitting in his own small room, maybe still holding the sandwich bag, maybe finally feeling seen. She hoped so. She wished him well, and with that wish, she felt her own spirit lighten. As darkness crept over Billings, Lou closed her eyes and let herself be grateful for Carl's memory, for the strength to help another, for the simple beauty of an ordinary day made meaningful by a single act. She did not know that the world outside her porch was already changing, that whispers of kindness were spreading far beyond what she could see. But for now, Lou was content. She'd done her part. The rest, she believed, would take care of itself. Life in Billings was not known for its surprises. That's why, for Lou Bennett, routine was a comfort. Every morning, she swept her porch, checked the mailbox, fed her trio of cats, and greeted the world with a nod and a quiet dignity. Days came and went with the gentle predictability of the seasons. Small joys woven into simple acts. A cup of tea, a neighbor's wave, sunlight spilling through lace curtains. But just 3 days after she placed the little flag on Carl's grave, something changed. Lou woke to a hammering sound outside her bedroom window, sharp, rhythmic, unmistakably out of place for a Monday morning. For a moment she thought it was another dream, but the sound persisted. She pulled on her robe and peered outside, expecting to see a woodpecker or maybe the Johnson boys horsing around in her yard. Instead, she found a work crew, 3 men in matching coveralls already stripping shingles from her roof, ladders braced against the eaves, tarps draped over her flower beds. A shiny white truck idled at the curb, logo on the door she didn't recognize. Lou blinked, thinking maybe she was still dreaming, and shuffled outside, slippers scuffing across the walk. "Excuse me," she called, voice wavering between confusion and command. "What on earth are you doing?" The man nearest her, a broad-shouldered guy with deep lines around his eyes, smiled gently. "Morning, ma'am. Don't mind us. We're just getting you fixed up." Lou folded her arms. "I didn't hire anyone, and I sure can't afford—" He held up a gloved hand. "No charge, ma'am. All taken care of. Materials and labor. We got an order to make sure this place gets a proper new roof. You won't owe a penny." She stared, bewildered. "By who?" He shrugged, lips twitching in a small, knowing smile. "Anonymous donor, that's all we know." He nodded toward the street. "Should be done by supper, if the weather holds." Lou stood rooted to the spot, the cool morning breeze tugging at her robe. She searched the faces of the workers for some clue, but they went about their business with practiced efficiency, not offering another word. She returned inside, her heart racing, and watched from the window as the old shingles were carted away and stacks of new ones were lined up with precision. All day, the sound of hammers and the scent of fresh tar filled her house. By evening, the men finished up, cleaned every scrap of debris, and left behind nothing but a flawless new roof and a white envelope taped to her door. Lou peeled it off with trembling fingers. Inside, a single piece of paper bore a brief, handwritten message. "Debt repaid, HR." Lou sat down hard on her porch step, the letter fluttering in her lap. Her mind whirled. HR? Could it be Hank Riley? She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the thought that the old soldier she'd helped at the bus station was somehow behind this kindness. But how? He'd barely had a sandwich to his name, and she'd never given him her address. The next morning, another surprise waited. A pair of sturdy paper bags rested on her stoop, brimming with fresh groceries, loaves of bread, a block of sharp cheddar, jars of preserves, a bouquet of daisies perched on top. No note, no explanation, just the gentle weight of generosity. The cats weaved between her ankles as she brought the bags inside, their purrs a comforting chorus in the quiet house. Lou tried to go about her day as usual, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched over, protected in ways she'd never expected. Her mind drifted as she tended her small garden, deadheading petunias and checking the beans climbing the fence. Every time she passed the kitchen window, she caught herself scanning the street, searching for a figure she wouldn't recognize. By the end of the week, the mysteries multiplied. Her old pickup, which had sputtered and groaned for months, now gleamed in the driveway. Windows spotless, engine humming, tires new. She opened the door to find the cab swept clean, a crisp air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. The ignition turned smooth as butter, and when she looked in the glove box, she found a gas card tucked inside, unsigned. That evening, as dusk fell and the first stars pricked the sky, Lou sat on her porch swing, envelope in hand. She read the note again and again, searching for answers. Debt repaid. Was it possible that her small act at the station had rippled out in ways she'd never imagined? She thought of Carl and the way he'd always insisted that kindness never came back empty. "It'll find you," he used to say. "It might take a while, but it'll find you." Lou wiped a tear from her cheek, both grateful and unsettled. She'd spent her life giving, not expecting much in return. Now, with every gift, she felt the ache of missing Carl more acutely, the way he'd grin and say, "Looks like someone's got an angel looking out for her." Unable to keep it all to herself, Lou picked up the phone and called her sister in Idaho, voice trembling as she recounted the week's events. Her sister listened, first in disbelief, then with mounting awe. "Maybe it's a miracle," she whispered. "Maybe it's just good coming back to you." Lou hung up, heart full. She poured herself a cup of tea, stared out at the street, and wondered about the invisible threads that connected people, the way a moment of kindness could spark a quiet revolution. Before bed, she slipped outside to the porch and looked up at the night sky, the Milky Way bright above the quiet town. She spoke aloud, voice steady and sure. "Thank you, whoever you are. And thank you, Carl, for teaching me to give without counting." She didn't know what the next day would bring, but for the first time in a long while, Lou felt the sweet anticipation of the unknown, the thrilling possibility that sometimes, in a world that so often forgets, goodness not only returns, but multiplies. Saturday dawned cool and bright, the kind of spring day that made even the oldest homes in Billings look hopeful. Lou Bennett sat at her kitchen table, spooning honey into her tea, when she noticed an unfamiliar vibration rattling the window glass. It was subtle at first, a low, distant rumble, like thunder without clouds. Her cats, usually sprawled across sunbeams, perked up and trotted to the door, ears pricked. Curious, Lou walked to the porch, mug in hand. The sound grew louder. Engines, dozens of them, deep and steady, rolling down Main Street in unison. She shaded her eyes, blinking at the parade of headlights cresting the hill, chrome glinting in the sunlight. That's when she saw them, a convoy of motorcycles, trucks, and a few classic cars, flags flying from antennas and saddlebags. The engines were big, American, Harleys and old Fords, battered Chevys kept alive by loving hands. Riders wore jackets patched with insignia from wars long past: Vietnam, Korea, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Beards gray, eyes sharp. Some walked with canes, others with the easy confidence of men and women who'd seen much and survived more. People stepped onto porches and stoops, drawn by the commotion. Children pointed and cheered. Dogs barked and wagged. The convoy rolled to a slow, respectful crawl, turning onto Elm Street, Lou's Street, before coming to a stop in front of her house. Neighbors gathered, wide-eyed, murmuring to each other. Mrs. McCrary clutched her robe. Mr. Patel from 2 doors down pulled out his phone to record. It seemed the whole block held its breath. From the lead truck, the door opened. Out stepped Hank Riley. Not the hunched, uncertain figure from the Greyhound station, but a soldier restored. Standing tall, proud in a full-dress uniform. His jacket gleamed with medals, polished boots, cap square on his head. His limp remained, but there was strength in his bearing, a steadiness that radiated dignity. He approached the porch, flanked by a half-dozen veterans, men and women of every age and background. The crowd parted for them, silent, respectful. Lou felt her heart thumping so loudly, she wondered if the others could hear. Hank stopped at the foot of her porch, sunlight catching the silver in his hair. He removed his cap, eyes shining. "Miss Bennett," he called. voice strong. "May I come up?" Lou nodded, words lost to her. She watched as he climbed the steps, slowly but with purpose. When he reached her, he extended his hand. She took it, her fingers trembling. "You made it," she whispered. "I did. Thanks to you." Hank smiled, and in that moment, Lou saw not just an old soldier, but every person she and Carl had ever helped, a living testament to what kindness could do. Hank turned to face the crowd. The other veterans stood at attention behind him, faces solemn. Lou realized the convoy had drawn not only neighbors, but much of the town. People filled the sidewalks, curious, cautious, waiting. Hank cleared his throat. "Friends, neighbors, folks of Billings," he began, his voice echoing in the hush. "Most of you don't know me, and that's fine. I came through your town on my last dime, with nothing left but a faded voucher and hope." He paused, glancing at Lou, then back at the crowd. "One person saw me. One person stepped out of the shadows when everyone else looked away. She didn't know me, didn't ask anything of me. She just bought me a ticket and gave me a sandwich." A ripple moved through the crowd. Shame, admiration, 1,000 emotions at once. Hank continued, "Her name is Lou Bennett, and today we're here because one act of kindness didn't just save me. It reminded me, and all of us, who we are." Behind him, the veterans nodded, some wiping their eyes. Motorcycles idled, flags fluttered in the breeze. Hank turned back to Lou, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You didn't just get me to Great Falls. You brought me home. You reminded me what home feels like." Lou swallowed, tears welling. "Oh, Hank." He gently squeezed her hand. Then to the town he raised his voice. "One ticket, one sandwich. That's what she gave me. Today we give her town back." With that, the veterans saluted Lou. The crowd burst into applause. Raucous, genuine, the kind that made Lou's knees wobble. She felt her cheeks flush, overwhelmed by the gratitude pouring toward her. Mrs. McCrary cheered. The Patel kids waved flags. People who'd never spoken to Lou shouted her name. Hank stepped aside as other veterans approached, hugging Lou, shaking her hand, some simply pressing a hand to their heart in silent thanks. For each, she had a word, a smile, a nod. She saw in their faces all the burdens they carried and the relief of knowing for a moment they were not alone. The mayor arrived, breathless, tie askew. He shook Hank's hand, then Lou's, promising to make this day a permanent mark on Billings' heart. Photographers snapped pictures. Local news crews jostled for interviews. The air was charged with something electric. Hope, rebirth, the rare knowledge that goodness had not gone unnoticed. Lou, dazed, tried to protest, but the crowd swept her up, neighbors patting her back, friends beaming with pride. For a woman who'd always believed in doing good quietly, it was all a little much. But in her heart, she felt Carl smiling, telling her to stand tall. Hank lingered beside her, sharing the weight of the moment. "It's your turn, Lou. Let them see." Together they looked out at the gathering. Veterans in battered leathers and pressed uniforms, teenagers with camera phones, old men leaning on canes, mothers holding babies, all drawn together by the simplest of acts. The sun rose higher, shining on Elm Street as if blessing the day. Lou, who had never asked for thanks, now stood in the center of her community, recognized not for grand gestures, but for a sandwich, a ticket, a moment of courage. The convoy's engines quieted. For the first time, Billings felt like more than a dot on a map. It felt like a family. And as Lou looked around, heart full to bursting, she realized that her small act of kindness had come home, multiplied 100-fold, ready to change the world. Sunday morning dawned with a kind of electricity in the air, a crackling expectation that something in Billings had shifted for good. All weekend, the town buzzed with talk of the convoy, the uniforms, the return of old soldiers, and most of all, of Lou Bennett and her simple act of courage. For years, Billings had moved along in quiet rhythms: work, school, church, chores. But now it seemed everyone was looking at their neighbors a little differently. Something long dormant had woken up. By noon, the transformation had begun. It started, as such things often do, with a single, purposeful gesture. Hank Riley and his fellow veterans, still in their jackets and boots, walked down Main Street to the old Peeling Elementary School. Paint chipped from the walls, the flagpole leaned, windows fogged with dust and age. Without waiting for permission or applause, the veterans began to work, scraping, sanding, washing, singing military tunes in low, steady voices. One by one, others joined them. The mayor arrived with his shirt sleeves rolled, wielding a paint roller awkwardly but gamely. Soon, teachers and parents stepped up, followed by teenagers. Kids who'd seen the video of Lou at the bus station, now viral, their curiosity turning into real commitment as they realized something important was happening right here, right now. Churches unlocked their kitchens and sent casseroles, chili, and trays of baked goods. The old Methodist ladies brought lemonade and sun hats, while Pastor Jim offered up his congregation's old tools and buckets of cold water. The air rang with laughter, the slap of paintbrushes, the steady thud of hammers. Even the most skeptical townsfolk, those who usually muttered about kids these days or nothing ever changes, couldn't help but pitch in. Lou Bennett herself was almost swept away in the tide of activity. One minute she was watching the veterans work, hands knotted in front of her. The next, she found herself directing a group of local teens in repainting the playground equipment. She showed them how to sand down the rust, prime the swings, and apply a fresh coat of bright blue paint. The teens, at first awkward and giggly, soon grew quiet and focused, listening to Lou's gentle instructions and sharing stories of their own grandparents who'd served. All around them, the energy built. The neglected war memorial at the edge of town, its stones green with moss and names faded by time, became the focus of a new team. Veterans and teenagers, side by side, cleaning, polishing, planting fresh flowers in neat rows. A few of the older men, Vietnam vets, some silent for years, told stories for the first time about friends lost and days gone by. Young people listened, some with tears in their eyes, realizing that history was alive and standing right in front of them. The mayor, who had come just to be seen, found himself handing out water bottles and organizing a crew to repair the old bandstand in the park. As he did, he looked around in disbelief. "I've lived here all my life," he said to Hank, "and I've never seen the town like this. What got into everyone?" Hank smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just took a spark, Mayor. Sometimes all you need is one good person doing the right thing. The rest takes care of itself." By mid-afternoon, news vans from Billings, and even farther out, Bozeman, Helena, had arrived, cameras rolling, reporters hustling for sound bites. Microphones were thrust in Lou's face, and though she tried to dodge them, she was caught again and again in the act of scrubbing a plaque, passing out sandwiches, comforting a crying child. She shrugged off praise, insisting, it was just a sandwich, just a bus ticket. Anyone would have done the same. But deep down, she knew, not everyone would, and that made her all the more determined to see this through. The whole town became a flurry of repair and renewal. Broken fences were mended, gardens weeded, lawns cut. A single mother's porch, sagging for years, was replaced in a single afternoon by a crew of grizzled bikers and bright-eyed high schoolers. Strangers who'd never exchanged more than a nod now worked side by side, sharing meals, stories, and laughter. The invisible walls between them, age, background, politics, seemed to fall away, replaced by the camaraderie of shared purpose. As the sun lowered, glinting gold off fresh white paint and new picket fences, the war memorial stood transformed. Names were legible again, flags snapped in the breeze. Small bouquets, left by unseen hands, lined the steps. People gathered, veterans, children, elders, reading the names aloud, letting the memory of sacrifice become real again. Lou stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, heart full. She watched as a shy teenager knelt to wipe dust from a forgotten name, then looked up at her with a smile. "Is this what your husband did, Miss Bennett?" he asked quietly. "Come back and help towns like this?" Lou nodded, voice soft. "He always said service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. It's what you do every day, in little ways, that matters most." Across the park, Hank Riley, beaming in his uniform, spoke quietly with the mayor and a local reporter. He gestured to the crowd, to Lou, to the bustle of repair all around them. "This isn't about one person," he said. "It's about all of us, reminding each other who we are, what we owe, how a town remembers itself." As dusk settled over Billings, the sound of laughter and music carried far into the evening. The church choir, joined by anyone who wished, sang "This Land is Your Land," while neighbors old and new shared plates of food at picnic tables. Hank raised his glass in a quiet toast to Lou, who blushed and shook her head, overwhelmed but deeply happy. That night, the local news ran a story titled, "Small Act Sparks Big Change in Billings." But for those who had lived it, the transformation was more than a headline. It was a feeling, a renewal of hope, pride, and connection. A reminder that kindness is never wasted, and that even the smallest gesture can revive a weary town. Lou walked home in the cool twilight, the voices of her neighbors fading into the night, her steps light, her soul at peace. She knew now that her husband's legacy lived on, not just in her, but in every hand that reached out, every heart that opened, every soul that remembered what it meant to be part of something bigger than themselves. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and bright, with a blue Montana sky so wide and high it seemed to bless the little town of Billings just for being alive. There was a gentle hum of excitement in the air as word spread that something special was happening down at Veterans Park. Banners fluttered between the trees, children in their Sunday best chased each other across the grass, and the scent of barbecues and fresh-cut flowers floated on the breeze. For Lou Bennett, it felt almost like waking up inside someone else's dream. She dressed with extra care that morning, pulling on her best slacks and Carl's old cardigan for luck. Her hands shook a little as she pinned her husband's service medal to her lapel. A quiet tribute, a reminder that she carried him with her always. When she stepped outside, she was greeted by neighbors, some friends, some strangers, offering rides, fresh muffins, flowers. "You're the guest of honor, Lou," Mrs. McCrary said, grinning from ear to ear as she pressed a bouquet of daisies into Lou's arms. "It's your day." Down at Veterans Park, the town had gathered in numbers that Lou couldn't have imagined just a week before. Kids waved small flags, families set up lawn chairs, and the mayor fussed over a row of folding chairs at the front. Local veterans stood in proud lines, their uniforms crisp, their faces weathered but beaming. A new bench, gleaming with fresh varnish and anchored beneath the old cottonwood tree, stood at the center of the crowd. The wood was smooth, the metal arms cool and strong, and a bronze plaque gleamed in the morning sun. As Lou approached, flanked by Hank Riley and a group of veterans, she could read the inscription, "Kindness Leads." Courage follows. Lou stopped short, hand pressed to her chest. Tears sprang unbidden to her eyes. It was simple, but it was everything. Words that captured not just the past week, but a lifetime of quiet, steadfast service. The mayor stepped forward, clearing his throat, his voice shaking just a bit as he addressed the crowd. Today, we come together to honor one of our own. Not because she asked for it, not because she wanted recognition, but because she showed us what community means. With one act of kindness, Lou Bennett reminded us all of who we can be, at our very best. There was a hush as Hank Riley approached the bench. Dressed in his full uniform, he held a folded American flag, its stars and stripes crisp and bright. He stood before Lou, his voice low but steady so the whole town could hear. Miss Bennett, on behalf of veterans everywhere, those you've met and those you never will, thank you for reminding us that we still matter, for reminding us that this country, this town, is built on the kindness and courage of people like you. He handed Lou the flag, their hands meeting, eyes shining with emotion. In that touch, Lou felt the weight of 1,000 stories, of soldiers returning home, of families holding on, of hope given and received. She clutched the flag to her chest, unable to find words. As the applause swelled, another veteran stepped forward with a thick envelope, passing it to Lou. She opened it to find a letter, handwritten and signed by dozens of veterans, men and women from all over the country, some local, some strangers, whose lives had been touched by the story spreading far beyond Billings. The message was simple but powerful. You reminded us who we are. Lou read the words, blinking back tears as her knees nearly buckled. She sat down on the new bench, running her hand over the smooth wood, letting the reality of the moment sink in. Around her, the town felt different, closer, kinder, more awake to the power of a single act. Children gathered near her feet, eyes wide with curiosity. Did you really help a soldier, Miss Lou? One little girl asked, clutching a flag. Lou smiled, her voice gentle. Yes, sweetheart. But really, I just did what anyone should do when they see someone in need. We all have that power. The girl nodded, thoughtful. Maybe I can help someone too someday. Lou squeezed her hand. I know you will. The rest of the day unfolded in a blur of hugs, stories, and laughter. The churches served lunch under white tents, and families lingered in the shade, sharing memories. Some veterans approached Lou quietly, offering thanks or telling her how much her story meant to them. One gave her a small pin shaped like an eagle, another, a simple handshake and a tearful, "Welcome home." As the sun arced across the sky, townsfolk took turns sitting beside Lou on the new bench, sharing slices of life and bits of wisdom. The mayor announced the park bench would stand as a permanent reminder, not just to honor a single act, but to inspire many more. Cameras flashed, and a reporter from a national news channel interviewed Lou, who tried to shift attention away from herself, insisting the day was really about what people could accomplish together. Later, as the crowd thinned and the sky turned gold, Hank Riley sat beside Lou on the bench. They watched children play tag near the war memorial, their laughter ringing across the grass. Do you think it'll last? Lou asked quietly. All this togetherness? Hank smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Maybe not forever, but long enough for folks to remember. And when things get quiet again, someone else will stand up, because they'll remember you did. Lou laid her hand atop the folded flag, the bench solid beneath her. Carl would have loved this, she murmured. He always said kindness isn't just a moment, it's a legacy. For a while they sat in companionable silence, the new bench anchoring them in the heart of the town. The plaque gleamed in the evening sun, a small beacon of hope, proof that courage and kindness echo long after the first act. As twilight settled over Billings, Lou felt a profound sense of peace. Her story was now part of something larger, a legacy not just in wood and metal, but in the lives she'd touched, the hope she'd helped rekindle. She had come to the park thinking the day was about her, but as she watched the community around her, she realized it was about all of them, and about the world they would build together. As the days after the park ceremony unfolded, Billings found itself quietly transformed. The sense of unity, pride, and hope that had washed over the town didn't disappear when the last slice of pie was served, or when the final photos were taken. Instead, it settled into the bones of the place, showing itself in small but meaningful ways. Neighbors greeting each other more warmly, teenagers picking up litter at the riverbank, churchgoers lingering outside after Sunday services just to talk a little longer. Lou Bennett, for her part, felt the world slow to a new, more thoughtful rhythm. I returned to her usual routines, walking to the grocery, tending her small garden, dropping off a loaf of banana bread at Mrs. McCrary's door. But inside, she carried a sense of quiet awe, as if she were moving through a dream. Each time she passed by Veterans Park, she saw the new bench glinting beneath the cottonwood tree, sunlight dancing across the plaque. The words, "Kindness leads, courage follows," felt less like a tribute to her and more like a challenge for the whole community. One afternoon, Lou sat on the bench, the folded flag in her lap. The air was sweet with wildflowers and newly mown grass. Across the park, children played, their laughter ringing out beneath the blue Montana sky. Hank Riley joined her, moving with the careful dignity of a man who had known both hardship and healing. He sat quietly, looking at the memorial, his face softened by reflection. "Funny thing about war," Hank said after a long pause. "A soldier remembers every sound, the roar of engines, the crack of rifles, the silence that falls when it's over. But after, what sticks with you isn't just the battle, it's the peace, the longing for a home, a handshake, a word of kindness from a stranger." He looked at Lou, his eyes clear. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't coming back. It's believing you belong again." Lou nodded, her own memories stirring. Carl's stories, the nights he'd sit by the window, lost in thought, the way he'd flinch at sudden noises even years after coming home. Carl used to say a uniform might get you respect, but it doesn't guarantee you'll be seen. It's the little things that make you feel human again. A smile, a meal, a place at the table. They sat together, the silence between them as comfortable as an old sweater. Around them, the town moved at its own pace. Dogs chasing sticks, teenagers skateboarding down the sidewalk, the distant clatter of someone fixing a fence. Yet, there was something different in the air, a sense of belonging, of people looking out for one another, inspired by a story that had become their own. A gentle narration began to take shape, as if the story itself wanted to be told not by one person, but by the town, by all who had been changed. A soldier remembers war, a veteran carries peace, but it's the everyday citizen who reminds them they still matter. These words echoed in Hank's heart, in Lou's mind, in the quiet prayers of the church, and the hum of the diner at sunrise. Small acts, buying a ticket, baking a pie, painting a school, were revealed as acts of service as powerful as any medal or parade. The town's teenagers, once content to stand at the edge and watch, now led projects of their own, repainting bus shelters, organizing food drives, visiting elders who had no family left nearby. Their energy brought fresh hope, their laughter a sign that the story wouldn't end with one generation. At the town hall meeting, the mayor, still surprised by the momentum, tried to capture the feeling. We talk about service like it's a thing you do and then you're done. But it's not. It's how you carry yourself every day. It's the hand you reach out, the word you offer, the moment you choose to see someone who's been invisible for too long. One evening, Lou found herself invited to speak at the American Legion Hall. She stood before veterans and their families, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier as she spoke. "I never saw myself as special," she admitted. "I just saw a man who needed help, the way so many have helped me and my family over the years. But I guess that's the point. Service isn't about medals or speeches. It's about showing up, about saying, 'I see you. You matter.'" The crowd listened, many wiping tears from their eyes. Afterward, an elderly woman hugged Lou, whispering, "You brought my husband out of his shell. He hadn't talked about the war in years. Now he's telling our grandson stories I thought were lost forever." At home, Lou pondered what all of this meant. She realized that her act of kindness, born of habit, not heroism, had unlocked something bigger than herself. She thought about the invisible threads connecting people across time and circumstance: a sandwich, a bus ticket, a flag, a bench beneath a cottonwood tree. Her own service, she understood now, was part of a larger legacy, one built day by day, in small acts and unseen moments. It was the kind of service that carried forward long after the applause died down, the kind that lingered in quiet rooms and sunlit parks, in the way neighbors waved and strangers smiled. The community of Billings, once quiet and divided by old habits, now pulsed with new life. It became a place where people paused to notice, to care, to reach out, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes bravely, but always with the hope that their kindness would find its way back. As summer ripened, the park bench became a gathering place for the town's stories. Veterans sat there, young and old, sharing memories. Children read the plaque and asked questions. Newcomers found welcome, and old friends found each other again. Lou watched it all, her heart full. She realized that the bench was not just a seat in a park. It was a symbol, a promise. It meant that no one was invisible here, that service would be honored, that kindness would lead, and courage would always follow. And so, the story echoed, passed from voice to voice, heart to heart, a living reminder that even the smallest act could reignite community, rebuild faith, and honor the invisible heroes among us. The warm days of early summer had returned to Billings, and with them a fresh vibrancy lingered in the air. The cottonwood trees cast dappled shadows across Veterans Park, where laughter rang out every afternoon as children played tag, their shouts echoing beneath the open Montana sky. The park's new bench, shining beneath the old tree, had become more than just a place to rest. It was a symbol, quietly drawing the town together. Lou Bennett often found herself walking by the bench, sometimes sitting quietly with her thermos of tea, sometimes stopping to chat with friends or strangers. Each time she was struck by how something so simple, a few planks of wood, a line of bronze, could anchor so many new memories. On weekends, she watched parents gather for picnics, teenagers strumming guitars, elderly veterans sitting in thoughtful conversation, sharing stories that might have otherwise been forgotten. One afternoon, as the sun slanted gold through the leaves, Lou watched a group of children racing around the bench. Their laughter was bright and free, their games filled with the kind of hope that only youth can muster. A small boy tripped and skinned his knee. Before he could cry, two girls rushed to his side, dusting him off and offering a reassuring hug. Lou smiled, seeing in their instinctive kindness the quiet legacy her simple act had set in motion. She leaned back, letting her thoughts drift. She remembered the first day, the Greyhound station, the silence, the shame in Hank Riley's eyes. She remembered the heaviness of that moment, and the way a single choice made without expectation had grown into something far bigger than herself. It had been nothing more than a sandwich and a bus ticket. Yet as she looked at the park now, she realized it had been everything. The park bustled with life. Lou's bench stood as a gathering place not just for people, but for hope itself. The plaque's words, "Kindness leads, courage follows," sparked conversations among young and old. Children asked their parents what courage meant, and parents explained that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply to help. The story of what happened in Billings had become legend in its own way. Local newspapers ran follow-up articles. The video of Lou's kindness had been shared across the country. Letters poured in from veterans and their families, from townsfolk in places Lou had never heard of. Each one a thank you, a story of kindness, a promise to pay it forward. Yet as all the noise faded, the town itself grew quieter and stronger. Neighbors continued to help neighbors. The spirit of service, once a faint memory, became a living tradition. Teenagers who had once filmed for a laugh now organized food drives and painted murals at the school. Churches and businesses worked together, setting aside differences for the greater good. The bus station, once a place of silent judgment, now displayed a sign above its door. Here, everyone matters. One morning, Lou found Hank Riley at the bench, deep in thought. He nodded as she sat beside him, the two of them sharing a companionable silence. For a long while, neither spoke. They didn't need to. After a while, Hank turned to her, voice gentle. "You know, I thought I was done, used up, invisible." He tapped the plaque. "But that day you saw me. You reminded me that I could be more, that I could help others too. We all need that sometimes. Someone to see us, even when we're lost." Lou squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of his words settle deep inside. "I didn't think it would matter so much," she admitted, "but I see now. Every little thing matters, if you do it with heart." They watched as the children circled the bench, weaving their own stories into the heart of the park. Lou saw the faces, old and young, friends and strangers, and realized her own life had become intertwined with theirs in ways she'd never expected. A gentle wind rustled the leaves. Lou thought of Carl, his memory bright as sunlight, and of all the unseen acts of kindness that had brought her to this moment. She remembered the nights she'd wondered if her small efforts made any difference. Now, she had her answer. As the day faded, the sounds of play gave way to the peaceful quiet of evening. Lou remained, watching the light shift and shadows lengthen, her heart full. She knew the story didn't end here. It would ripple outward, carried by every person touched by what had happened. A soft, steady voice, her own, yet larger than herself, seemed to narrate the moment. A final message woven into the fabric of the town. She didn't fix the world. She just bought a bus ticket. But that ticket carried more than a man. It carried hope, and it stopped at every heart on the way. The bench would weather storms and seasons. The park would change and grow. And someday, someone else would need a seat, a smile, a moment of kindness. Lou understood now that every town, every heart, was built not on grand gestures, but on the small, everyday choices to care for one another. As she rose to leave, the last children ran up to say goodbye, arms around her waist, their voices sweet and bright. "Thank you, Miss Lou," they called, their gratitude honest and pure. Lou walked home beneath the setting sun, the park glowing behind her, the town alive with the echo of kindness. She smiled, knowing that even the smallest act could change everything, that every day offered a chance to begin again, to lead with kindness and let courage follow. And for Billings, Montana, that one ticket would be remembered, not as the day a stranger got a ride, but as the day a community learned to see one another, to lift each other up, and to believe again in the power of a single good deed.